Don't get sucked in. In the past, the hazard of working around an aircraft engine was rather basic. One false move, and the prop leave a lasting impression. On today's modern jet engine, with its faired and cowled inlet and exhaust, the same or greater hazards exist. An operating jet engine draws in large amounts of air to support combustion and to provide the required thrust. Air entering the inlet is at high velocity and is capable of exerting enough force to pull a person who is in close proximity toward or into the engine inlet. Likewise, the hot gases exiting the engine are at such high velocity that they can knock a person down and cause severe injuries. Air movement is not the only hazard of working around a jet engine. The noise level produced by an operating engine is capable of causing temporary as well as permanent loss of hearing. Accordingly, ear protection must be worn at all times when the engines are operating. Also, the gases present in the engine exhaust can irritate the eyes and the respiratory system. With these hazards in mind, let's look at the record of the modern Boeing jet fleet. There is a Boeing jet taking off or landing every 3 seconds of every day somewhere in the world. Safe operation and maintenance of these jet aircraft are prime concerns to us at Boeing. Since 1969, there have been 16 reported incidents of human ingestion into the inlets of the 737 engine. Failure to follow procedures and safety precautions published in the Boeing Maintenance Manual appears to be the cause of all known ingestion incidents. If proper procedures are not followed while performing maintenance on an operating 737 engine, the risk of ingestion is particularly significant because the inlet is so near the ground. The inlet lip is only 33 inches from the ground. This subjects more body surface to high velocity and increases the possibility of inlet ingestion. Note the safety placards on the side of the engine cowl. They indicate the hazard zone for above idle power settings. The area forward of the red line should not be entered when the engine is above idle power. At idle, the safe zone extends only 1 foot forward of this line. As indicated on the placard, stay clear of the forward area in front of the engine and make sure that all loose articles are removed from this area. Most of the human ingestion accidents have involved individuals who were performing maintenance on the sides of the engine. Since the hazard area dimensions and definitions vary between airplane models, it is important that maintenance personnel be familiar with engine hazard area charts contained in the respective maintenance manuals. Remember, at idle thrust, the inlet hazard area on the 737 extends 4 feet aft of the inlet lip. Maintenance personnel cannot enter or exit a forward area of the core cowl without entering the intake hazard zone. When the engine is operating above idle thrust, the hazard zone extends 1 foot further aft or 5 feet aft of the inlet lip. At idle, the inflow suction force in the hazard zone can more than quadruple with the first 2 footsteps toward the inlet. This force doubles if a person turns to face the inlet and triples if he changes from a crouched position to a standing position. Loose clothing is also a problem. Air movement has a tendency to make loose clothing balloon, which increases the surface area subjected to the inlet airflow, thus exerting additional force on the human body. The purpose of this program is to demonstrate the proper safety procedures for performing representative maintenance tasks in the vicinity of an operating jet engine on the 737. We will look at the areas where engine fuel control trim, oil pressure adjustment, and leak checks are performed on the 737-200. Before performing any maintenance on an operating engine on any Boeing aircraft, always consult the maintenance manual for the correct procedures, warnings, cautions, and hazard areas. When performing any of the previously mentioned maintenance items on an operating engine on the 737-200, the maintenance manual requires that the engine core cowls be removed. For additional protection, when performing any maintenance on an operating 737 engine, Boeing recommends the use of a newly designed safety harness. The harness used in this program is a quick-release type and can be donned easily. Note, for production safety, the engines will not be operating during the following demonstrations. The outboard side of an engine, operating at idle power, can be safely approached by staying well aft of the red hazard zone. If a harness is used, first attach the safety harness lanyard to the hard point on the engine. When performing trim adjustment to fuel control, Boeing recommends the use of remote trim equipment. If any operator elects to manually adjust the fuel control, special awareness of hazard boundaries and safety procedures are required. Note that the mechanic can reach into the hazard zone as long as the body is aft of the hazard zone. To exit from this position, stand up and move aft. Remove the lanyard, then exit aft of the hazard zone. To approach the inboard side of an engine, first establish communication with the flight deck to ensure the engine is operating at idle. Then start from the nose wheel well area and follow the fuselage, keeping a shoulder next to the fuselage. At a point just in front of the landing gear, cross over to the engine. Now, attach the lanyard to the hard point on the engine. From this position, the mechanic can inspect the external components or perform an oil pressure adjustment. To exit from this position, stand up parallel to the engine, remove the lanyard, and move aft. Cross over to the fuselage and move forward, keeping the shoulder next to the fuselage. It is recognized that some operators may not remove the core cowls to perform maintenance actions. If so, it is vital to remember that you cannot enter or exit at the forward end of the cowl without entering the intake hazard zone. If maintenance is performed with the cowls open, first, stabilize the engine at idle. Then, approach from the side aft of the core cowl. Enter the aft section of the cowl, then move laterally under the cowl. When wearing a harness, the lanyard should now be attached to the hard point on the engine prior to performing maintenance. To exit from this position, move aft and stand up. Remove the lanyard, move further aft, then exit the rear of the cowl and move away from the engine. To approach the inboard side of engine operating at idle, proceed as before. Start well forward of the engine alongside the fuselage and cross behind the landing gear. Enter the rear of the cowl and move forward. If a harness is worn, the lanyard can be attached to the hard point on the engine. From this position, system components are accessible. To exit from this position, move aft and stand up. Remove the lanyard and move aft to exit the rear of the cowl. Cross over to the fuselage and move forward, keeping the shoulder next to the fuselage. The inlet hazard zone for the 737-300 is the same as the -200. The two procedures that we will look at are an engine leak check, which is the only engine check requiring operating engine, and the removal of ground air after the engines have been started. Boeing recommends that leak checks be performed with the fan cowls closed. The engine is run up to idle and then shut down. Then the cowls can be opened and a leak check can be performed. It is recognized not all leaks can be isolated in this manner. The following procedure details a method of performing a leak check with the engine operating idle and the cowls open. Warning: the engine must be shut down before attempting to latch or unlatch the fan cowls. The forward fan cowl latches are in the hazard zone. Standing outside the hazard zone and communicating with the flight deck, approach the aft section of the fan cowl. Note that the mechanic is wearing the Boeing recommended safety harness. Enter the aft section of the fan cowl and attach the lanyard to the hard point on the engine. Crouch down and inspect the oil system. Notice the mechanic is keeping his body aft of the hazard zone. To exit from this position, stand up and remove the lanyard. Move aft under the cowl and exit, staying aft of the hazard zone. To approach the inboard side of the engine under these same conditions, start well forward of the hazard zone alongside the fuselage. Proceed aft, keeping the shoulder next to the fuselage. At a point just in front of the landing gear, cross over to the aft section of the fan cowl. Move under the cowl and attach the lanyard to the hard point on the engine. Crouch down and perform the leak check. To exit from this position, stand up parallel to the engine. Remove the lanyard and move aft to exit the rear of the cowl. Cross over to the fuselage and move forward, keeping the shoulder next to the fuselage. Removing ground air from the aircraft is a frequently performed procedure which places personnel near the edge of the inlet hazard zone. If proper procedures are not followed, the hazard zone can be violated. With the engine started and at idle, remove the ground air. Move forward along the fuselage until you are at the nose wheel. Then, move away from the aircraft at a 45-degree angle. The safety procedures we have shown are simple and straightforward. Know your aircraft's hazard zones. Communicate with the flight deck. Always approach or exit aft of the hazard zone. Use a harness for additional safety. Be smart. Don't get sucked in.